Hello, everyone. Welcome. Just before we get started, why don't we wait for a few more people to hop on? If you want to type into the question box where you're from so we can see where people are coming from, listening from, that would be great. Nice. Got a Houston, Texas. Upstate New York, me as well. Nice. Canada. Oh, London. Cool. UK. Nice. All right then, since it's noon, we're going to go ahead and get started. So hi everyone, for today's webinar is Unlevel the PPC playing field. Welcome. I'm Heather Frederick, your webinar host from Main Street ROI. And for today's webinar, we're excited to welcome Fred Vallaeys, CEO and co-founder of Optmyzr. This presentation will be about 40 to 45 minutes so that we can have plenty of time at the end for a live Q&A session. So feel free to type any questions that you have in the Q&A box along the way, and then we'll get back to them at the end of the webinar. And as always, today's webinar will be recorded, and we'll send out a replay video along with the PDF of the slides to everyone who signed up. So, if you get calls or you get pulled away for work or anything like that, don't worry, you're not going to miss anything. And we're also going to be doing a giveaway of 5 copies of Fred's new book, Unleveling the Playing Field. So make sure you stick around, and we're going to announce that at the end of the webinar. All right, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Fred so he can get started.
Okay, thanks, Heather. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. So, we're going to talk about unleveling the playing field and basically how to win in PPC in an age when everything from Google and Microsoft seems to be becoming more and more automated. So that's the topic for today. My name, Frederick Vallaeys, or Fred Vallaeys, co-founder and CEO at Optmyzr. I've got a long career in PPC. I started at Google back in 2002. Was there for about 10 years. I was involved in building a lot of Google ads. It was called AdWords back then. I was involved in the acquisition of a company called Urchin, which is now Google Analytics. Worked on inventing conversion tracking because, yes, strangely enough, there was a day back in the day when we did PPC and we didn't actually have conversion tracking, so we were kind of flying blind. So did a lot of cool stuff there, but then after 10 years, I decided to strike out on my own and solve some of the problems that Google wasn't fixing, problems for professional marketers. Google AdWords is obviously trying to work for a lot of advertisers, millions of them. So sometimes that means they kind of have to dumb things down a little bit and not do the best job for professional marketers. So that's where Optmyzr came in, and we started building solutions to help professional marketers save a lot of time and make their accounts more efficient. Besides Optmyzr, I'm on Twitter. You'll find me making videos on YouTube to explain PPC concepts. I blog for our company blog as well as Search Engine Land. And I'm also the host of PPC Town Hall, which is about twice a month, where we bring together some great PPC experts and we chat with them about the latest issues and challenges that we see in the industry. So what I'm hoping to cover today, besides hopefully your many great questions, is the changing nature of PPC management and what that really means in terms of new and modern optimization tactics, right? What we're going to do today to optimize an account is very different from what we used to do 5 years ago, and I'm going to share with you what that is. And I also want to introduce the concept of automation layering. So in terms of how I'm going to talk about how you optimize, there's going to be a lot of work, but you can make that work a lot more bearable, a lot less time intensive by using techniques like automation layering. So I'll explain what that is. But let's start from the top with the changing nature of PPC management. So Google Ads is really interesting, right? Because there's all this automation that's been added over the past couple of years. So now we have obviously smart bidding, automated bidding. We have responsive search ads that handle figuring out your ad testing. We have even exact match keywords behaving much more like broad match keywords and allowing your ad to show for a variety of queries. And all of this is driven by machine learning and artificial intelligence. And so the whole thought is, well, that should really make advertising easier, because in the old days, we'd look at all of these things you see on the slides. We'd have to figure out, well, how do we bid differently for different age groups? Or should we have different messages based on the gender, right? If we're selling shoes, should we have different ads for women's shoes? If women come and look at our ad, should be men's shoes when men come and look at our ad? So all of this detail was supposed to become easier to handle. But at the same time, now if you want to turn on smart bidding and automated bidding, it's like, it's not the exact numbers anymore, but at some point there were 11 types of automated bidding. So it's not as simple as just saying, okay, flip the switch on this one thing and it's going to work for you. You actually have to understand what's the nuanced difference between these 11 different types of bid management and which one is best for me and how is it going to work with everything else that I've set up in my account. But the reason that Google's doing so much automation is that at the time of the search happening, the time that the ad auction is run, they need to look at a lot of signals. And so it's pretty impressive. Google looks at about 500,000 signals to choose the best ad for a search. And they look at more than 70 million signals to decide which ad to run on the display network or a discovery ad or in Gmail. And even Optmyzr, we look at over 1 gigabyte of data for many of the recommendations that we make as far as how you should optimize your account. Now, all of this automation, of course, fits into this picture here, right? So Boston Consulting, together with Google, did a study in 2019, and they basically found that if you use automated systems to run your PPC accounts, you were going to get 20% more efficiency from those accounts. So your revenue would increase 20%. And that's great. But then humans started asking the question, well, you know, with all this automation, what am I supposed to do? Like if you're going to handle the bidding, and that's something I used to do, what do I do now? There's a lot of stuff you can do, and that's a lot of what my book is about. But one of the core messages is that if you assist the machines and you layer your intelligence on top of the machines, you're going to get another 15% of efficiency out of those accounts. So there's still a lot of value added by humans in this equation. Now, if we think about optimization in the old days before the automation era, you see these circles, right? And these were all the little things and the big things that we had to handle, right? So keywords and bids, those were very foundational. We'd spend a lot of time on that. But then we'd get into, you know, day parting, day of week, and then we get into maybe once in a while doing audience segmentation. We do ad optimization. So a lot of detail. And ultimately, the reason we managed so much detail was because we wanted to achieve leads, sales, or signups. But oftentimes, really, when you said you wanted a lead, and think about yourself for a minute, if you're in lead gen, is your business really to generate leads? Well, no, right? It's probably to generate customers, and a lead is an intermediate step towards a customer. If you're in e-commerce and you say, my goal of these PPC campaigns is to drive more sales, well, is it really more sales, or is it bigger profits, or is it more top-line revenue? It could be one of these things. And so in the old days of managing PPC, we were so far removed from the actual thing we were trying to do because there was so much detail we had to manage. Now, luckily, in the era of automation, all of that detail that was in these circles, you know, that's being handled by Google, by the Google machine learning system. And so what it means for us as PPC managers is we have to go through a pretty drastic mind shift here. So we have to think much more about optimization at the periphery of the ad system. So what data do we bring into the ad system so that it can do a better job with all the little details that we used to manage in the past? And for me, that really falls into 3 big buckets. So the first one is the optimization of targets. You know, you have targets to help you achieve profitability. When you talk about tROAS, you know, do you have a ROAS target or a CPA target because that's your business metric? Or is that, again, one step towards helping you achieve what your business actually wants to get? And then as you have different goals, you may have different account structures. So that's a big thing of what you do now is figuring out what are those account structures. And then there's optimization of conversion data as a second big bucket, right? So again, it's to the point that in the past, when you said, I am in lead gen, I want to drive leads for my business. Well, yeah, that's all good and well. We all want leads, but really what we want is customers. How do you communicate to Google when a lead actually turned into a customer? Because if you don't do that, then their automation is not going to be able to have the best information to help it do the job that you want it to do. And then the third point is optimization of structured data. So whereas we used to manage, you know, an ad in the past, and it'd be a couple of headlines, a couple of description lines, Now we're thinking about structured data feeding into the ads. There's ad extensions, there's responsive search ads. If you look at performance max campaigns, we're just putting in images and then Google figures out how to put all of this together. If you're a shopping advertiser, you have a merchant feed. And depending on what happens in that merchant feed, that decides what Google is going to show in your ad, which images are going to pick, or what text is it going to show for the description. Right, so there's a lot of optimization you have to do there, which is very different from what you may have done in the past. So let's talk more about this whole optimization of structured data a little bit more. So I did a search here for flowers, and back in the old days, the first ad here would have been literally whatever was put in by the advertiser. So 1-800-Flowers would have written exactly this ad with the headlines in the correct order, the description right there. But nowadays, well, that first component of the headline, that might be headline portion 2 plus headline portion 12 from responsive search ads. So Google has picked from 15 different possibilities that you gave it, and it's put that together. So your job is all of a sudden become figuring out what are the 15 headline variations that I should give Google so it can do a good job on the fly putting this together. The description could be description number 3 out of the 4 different variations that you gave to Google. Then there's a bunch of extra links or side links, and these come from ad extensions. So extension optimization is a big portion of what you should be doing today. There's a deal shown. That deal comes from a promotions feed, which you've put into the Google Merchant Center. Making sure that that is in sync with your actual promotion schedule, that's a big portion of what you do nowadays. And then you can also use image extensions and figuring out what images are going to trigger good results and happy customers. That's another big part of what you do nowadays, right? But so it's no longer as simple as just writing the ad. It's like 5 different systems now that you feed information into, and then Google on the fly puts that together. And so a lot of what's driving that are RSAs. RSA stands for responsive search ad. And if you're not 100% familiar with this, just know that the text ads, so the text ads that you've been writing for the past, say, 10 years, those will no longer be available starting on July 1st. So in about a month and a half from now, you will no longer be able to make new regular text ads. Instead, you're going to use these responsive search ads, which again have 15 headline variations, 4 description variations, and then Google just puts it together on the fly. And we've been tracking this pretty closely since they were introduced in 2020. And the adoption rate right now, there's only about 7.7% of accounts that we looked at. And we manage about $4 billion of ad spend, 4 billion with a B, on Google. So we're looking at a lot of accounts for this, but only about 7 or close to 8% are not quite using this yet. So, if you need to get on board, Google actually has some great data, and it shows that if you just take your existing expanded text ads, and you take those existing headline components and you just transfer them over into a responsive search ad, right? So you go into an ad group, you take all of your ETA1, ETA2, you take all the components, put them into a new RSA. Just doing that without changing any of the text, on average, leads to 7% more conversions, is what Google sees. So obviously that's a pretty good thing, right? That's 7% more conversions for doing something super simple, which is transferring your data into an RSA. Now, there are 2 ways that you can do this relatively quickly. One is you go into the Google Ads UI and you look at the Opportunities tab, so the one that's related to the Opti score. There's going to be a suggestion for responsive search ads, and there's an Apply All button. And that's literally going to do what I showed on this slide here. It's going to do it for every ad group that doesn't have responsive search ads. The downside of that is that it doesn't give you a lot of flexibility to go and make edits, right? So everything's going to be pre-populated, and then later on you have to go into the account and make edits. We have a script that we're going to be publishing next week on our blog, so you can look for that. That's going to take all of your expanded text ads, put all the components into a spreadsheet, which is going to be compatible to upload into Google to generate your responsive search ads. The benefit of the script is obviously that you get it into a spreadsheet, so you can go through it and you can make tweaks and edits before you actually post it into the account. So the other point that we have to make here is that as you migrate to RSAs, which are basically a forced migration, so it's just a matter of time of when you do it, you do have to consider that all of these automations tend to work better when you put them together. And so smart bidding is a good example, right, with RSA. So you have to have an RSA, combine it with smart bidding. that's kind of a must. Google says you should also combine it with broad match. In my mind, combining it with broad match is optional. If you combine it with broad match, you're going to see incrementally more conversions again, because you let the Google machine figure out where those conversions could come from. But so this is an interesting stat that Google had as well, was that you get 20% more conversions at a similar cost by combining these three automations. And that was compared to the 7% when you're not adding these automations, but you're just switching over to responsive search ads. Now, I wanted to explain why it's so important that you combine automations together, and you can't just run one automation like responsive search ads while continuing to do manual bidding. Okay, so let me walk you through this slide. So there's two queries happening. One is flower bouquets, and the other is discount flowers. Now, flower bouquets, that's maybe the keyword that you had. Discount flowers, that's a query with a likely a lower conversion probability, right? Somebody's looking for kind of a bargain, so they may not convert at the same rate, or they may not buy as expensive of a bouquet as someone who's just looking for a flower bouquet. Now, I showed here then two rows for each of these queries, whether it was an ETA or an RSA, ETA being expanded text and RSA being responsive search ad. So the ad qualifies for the auction, the flower bouquets in both cases. And if you're on manual bidding, well, then it bids $5. And if you're using smart bidding, it may also bid $5, because this is a pretty good query, right? But here's the problem now. So discount flowers, if you were running on expanded text ads, your ad probably didn't qualify for the auction because your quality score may have been too low. So there was no problem. The ad doesn't show, so you're not paying anything. So there's no bid happening. But if the RSA gets added to your account, all of a sudden Google says, well, we can put together your ad in a combination that makes this person who is searching for discount flowers actually click on the ad. If you were on manual bidding, max CPC of $5, well, that max CPC of $5 goes into the auction. And that's bad, because now you're paying $5 for something that's going to convert less. So you're going to have a worse cost per acquisition on this. However, if you were using smart bidding, then Google system knows that there's a lower conversion probability, and it's automatically going to lower the bid. So now it's going to bid $1, and at that $1, you may actually still get the same cost per acquisition. So you're getting profitable conversions by combining smart bidding together with these automations like responsive search ads. So hopefully that kind of explains why it's so important to combine these things together. Now, also, if you're going to be running responsive search ads, it's very important that you stop using outdated methods for optimization. And so we pulled our data very recently, so I just pulled data a couple of weeks ago. But what we saw is that responsive search ads will typically get 4 times as many impressions compared to an ETA ad. Okay, and so if you go back to this slide, again, what this is saying is that in the old days, Google would have been limited to which keywords and which queries they could show your ad for, like flower bouquets. Your ETA might not have shown because the quality score was too low. But now, because you have an RSA, it can actually start showing you for more and more queries. And so what we see is that there's 4 times as many queries happening on RSAs. And even the conversions are significantly higher. They're also over 4x from the conversions that you would see on an expanded text ad. Okay, so that's kind of interesting, but now let's put that in context of how a lot of people have done ad testing and A/B testing for ads. So many of you are probably familiar with the metric of conversions per impression. So if you're comparing 2 ads, right, you got your RSA ad in the top here, in the top row, that has a CTR of 5.5%, which is 10% better than an expanded text ad. And that's pretty typical in the numbers that we look at across the system. However, the RSA, the big complaint that advertisers have is the conversion rate tends to be less. And in this case, it's 20% less than the ETA. So you multiply the CTR by the conversion rate, you get the number which is conversions per impression. That's how you measure success, right? And so what you see is that the ETA, the legacy ad that Google is getting rid of, actually has a better number for this. So you're like, why should I run RSAs? Well, here's the problem. You didn't look at the impressions, because historically you haven't had to look at impressions, right? The impressions were sort of static for an ad group. They were based on keywords. Now the volume of impressions you get is highly dependent on the ad format that you're running on. So if you see that you get twice as many impressions here, sorry, and there's no mouse pointer, but on that first row RSA, you see the impressions column. It's 2,000 impressions compared to 1,000 for the ETA. Well, you multiply these numbers out, now you see that you get 8.8 conversions from the RSA. And that's the incrementality you have to focus on. So long as you're using smart bidding, Google is going to give you these incremental conversions within the parameters and the bounds of your CPA, of your return on investment targets. And so that's why RSAs are so good, but you have to measure them in this new way, otherwise you're going to start making mistakes. Now, a lot of people, they still want to do ad testing, right? You have 15 headline variations, but you might say, well, what if I used Optmyzr versus Optmyzr.com, where I put the .com at the end of the company name. So you can use ad variations. And if you haven't done this, look in the left sidebar of Google. There's a section for experiments. And within that, there's a section for ad variations. Go into these ad variations and you can start doing a lot of testing, statistically valid testing for responsive search ads. And so the types of numbers you're going to get out, like you see at the bottom, is going to actually indicate when it's reached statistical significance. So some ideas of what you can test is adding or removing assets. So this is a great place to try big changes. So what would happen with my conversion rate if I started having a different offer, or if I had a different unique value proposition that I was talking about? Or what if I try a new call to action, a new CTA? What if I use ad customizers, right? What if I use dynamic keyword insertion? So you can use the system to add or remove assets and see if the performance would have gotten better or worse. Yeah, you can also use this whole ad variation system to test pinning. Pinning is a big topic in responsive search ads. Generally, you're going to get worse results by pinning because you're limiting the machine in terms of what it can do. But if you have to pin, you can always test it out through an ad variation, and it will tell you if it's working or failing for you. It's going to give you numbers just like this. So here we did a pin where we put the ad text optimizer, and we pinned it to headline position number 2. It's generally showing up in position number 1. So I said, what would happen if I pinned it to position 2? And it said, well, we have statistically significant results that says this is going to perform worse. So now I had my answer, and I could comfortably go back to letting Google decide this for me, because me making that decision and pinning it, it was shown in the numbers that that was actually doing worse. And this is cool because you can take it back to your client, you can take it back to your boss, and you can show them that you're not just letting Google decide, but you've actually validated that Google's decisions are the right ones in this case. So that's a little bit about optimizing feeds and specifically RSAs. Now, the second way that I talked about working and optimizing in 2022 for PPC is optimization of targets, right? So if you have return on ad spend targets, you have to make sure you're not just saying to Google that you want to have a high return on ad spend. And what this chart is showing you is on the y-axis is the profit per conversion. So the x-axis shows you number of conversions. So if you want a really high profit per conversion all the way on the left side of the chart, you're generally going to get fewer conversions, right? Because you're limiting yourself, you're not quite as competitive. So you might get 1 or 2 sales that are highly profitable, but you're not going to get hundreds of conversions. On the flip side, if you go too far down to the right side and you set a really low return on ad spend target, you're going to get tons of conversions, but you might actually decrease your profit per conversion to the point that you're losing money on your ad spend. And so I've talked to agencies, I've talked to end advertisers, and sometimes they just go into the system and they say, hey, well, I would really like to have a 10x return on my ad spend. But that 10x return is just like a number they grabbed out of thin air. There was no logic, there was no math behind that, right? And so if you actually run the math and you look at what level of return on ad spend do I maximize my profit, that might be somewhere in the middle. But the cool thing is now you're actually talking about a true business metric. We care about profits. So how do I get the most profit? That's not the highest return on ad spend. That's not the lowest return on ad spend. It's somewhere in the middle. But figuring out where that is in the middle does require some experimentation. And that's a big value add that you can still bring, even though everything's automated, right? It's not super simple to just set a return on ad spend. Now, also, as you're going to setting up your conversion tracking in Google, this is a change that you may have noticed, but now they have primary actions and secondary actions. So as you communicate to Google, what equates to success for you, make sure you're doing this correctly. So a primary action is going to be something that Google is going to consider for their bidding algorithms. Anything that's a secondary action is for observation only. So that gives you interesting data you can make manual decisions with, you can use it for reporting, but the automated bidding systems require something to be a primary conversion action. So that's new, relatively new in the system. It used to be called quote unquote include in conversions. It was a checkbox. Now Google's changed the user interface a bit on this. So I did want to point it out in case anyone was confused about this. But then when it comes to setting the different goals, those goals have to support different business goals. And that sometimes means setting up different campaigns, different account structures. So, Google might tell you, simplify everything, put everything into a single campaign. It's going to make management easier. It's going to make reporting easier. Well, yes, that may be true, but if you have different product categories that you sell in your business and those product categories have different seasonalities, you may actually benefit from having different targets. And to have different targets, you would need to put things in different campaigns. So your account structure, it shouldn't be about granularity for the sake of granularity, but it should be about having a structure that supports how you want to run your business goals. And as you can see here, if we had Easter decorations, well, we probably want to set a really good 400% return on ad spend goal just before Easter. But once it's past Easter, I mean, we're happy to sell this stuff, right? So we don't need as much profit. In fact, we might be willing to take a loss. So we're going to decrease the return on ad spend target. But we don't want those Easter decorations to be in the same campaign as patio furniture, which has completely different seasonality, where summer is like the big time. And then car accessories, which you sell year round, we don't want that to be with patio furniture because, the return on ad spend targets, it'd be bad if we were changing these for something that is just equally popular all year round. So the point is, Google may tell you one thing about simplification, but my point is make sure that you set up your structure based on what matters and makes sense to your business. And that's completely fine. Google often says too that you should simplify your structure and put everything in one campaign, because that way the machine gets more data to learn from. Well, here's the fact of the matter. Smart bidding uses conversion actions. It does not care about the structure. I mean, if you look at conversion actions, you can set up at the MCC multi-account level, or you can set them up at the account level, or you can even set them up at the campaign level. Now, if you set them up at the multi-account level, then it literally means any portion of that account, regardless of whether it's on automated or manual bidding, if that gets conversions from that conversion action that you said is a primary conversion action to teach the machine how to bid better, that's going to be used for everything, for other accounts, for other campaigns within the same account. Right? So that's a point that a lot of people miss. They kind of make structural decisions based on keeping conversions together, when the Google system, in fact, completely does not care about that. It just cares about the conversion action and the data that has. Right? And then if people have questions, we'll take those at the end, but feel free to put them into the Q&A box. And then if people get confused along the way here, put that in the Q&A as well, and I'll briefly pause and address any questions. All right, so let's go into the third point here. So optimization of conversion reporting. So I was at Google for 10 years, like I said, and we had these 10 principles of innovation that made Google what it was back in the day. And so sharing all information was one of those big ones. And for Google, it was really in the context of they were hiring smart people, lots and lots of people, and it was, you couldn't micromanage 10,000, 20,000 people, right? But what they said was, we have smart people, so if we give all these people all the information about the goals that we're trying to achieve and the business data that we have, then they will combine those two together and they will roughly end up making the same decisions, or they'll make decisions that take us to the point where we want to be. So the goals have to be clear, and the business data that we're using to make decisions has to be clear. So share all information. My point is, machine learning, which is used for automation, is just like human colleagues that you have. You can't expect them to do a great job if you're only sharing partial information with them, right? And so here's an example of that. So it's not all conversions are equal. So we have 3 conversions on this page. The first conversion is someone who fills out the lead form. and we say that has a value of $100, right? So every time somebody fills out the lead gen form, we say it's a value of $100. Now the second conversion, well, they fill out the lead gen form, but then they actually get a free estimate. Somebody comes to their house to do an estimate to install new air conditioning, for example. Oh, that's actually worth more than just filling out the lead gen page. So maybe we should evaluate that at $200. And then that third conversion, also they fill out the lead gen page, somebody comes to the house, does a free estimate, but they turn into a customer. That's even worth more. The problem is too many advertisers, they don't communicate this. So in CPA bidding, you basically don't communicate these steps after the lead gen page to Google. So now Google says, well, all of these were kind of the same, so we're going to bid the same amount for them, right? And that doesn't make sense. You ideally would want to bid at different levels. So if you start to do return on ad spend bidding and you start to change up the values that you report to Google and you use mechanisms to tell Google, oh, this was a lead, but it also turned into a customer, now the machine can get smart and it says, well, for that first one, we would have bid $10, but for that second one, we could bid 20, and for the third one, because it's worth 3 times as much, we can bid up to $30. So all of a sudden, what's happening now is by communicating better to Google what your goals are and how much that's worth, and by switching from a cost per acquisition strategy to a return on ad spend strategy, Google's going to allocate more of your budget to the highest value prospects. And that's a good thing, right? Because keep in mind, if you're just trying to maximize your conversions and you're not feeding Google all of this data about what happens offline, well, it's going to give you a ton of lead form generations, lead form fills, but all of these might not go on to the next step, right? And that's the cheapest way for them to get you lots of conversions. But I'd actually rather have fewer conversions that turn into real customers rather than have lots and lots of leads that turn into nothing, right? I'm going to spend the same amount of money, but in one case, I'm actually going to turn a profit. In the other case, I've just wasted my $10,000 that I was spending on Google Ads for that month. And so there's other techniques you can use to communicate this data to Google, right? So it's about mastering offline conversion tracking. Oftentimes that means you have to capture the GCLID, which is the Google Click ID. So a customer clicks on the ad, they request the info from your lead gen page. What you do as an advertiser, you save that unique parameter that Google sends along with every click from the Google Click ID. You put that into your CRM system, into your sales system, and now as the person goes through the different steps of conversion, you can report that back to Google to start boosting up the value so that Google will say, oh, that was a better lead. We need to get more of those types of leads. Now, all of that GCLID stuff, that was pretty hard, so I do want to share something new and exciting with you, which is Google has introduced enhanced conversions for leads. And what you do here is very simply communicate the email address. So the lead gen form, somebody already fills in the email address. All you do now is you send that email address to Google, and then 2-3 weeks later, when that person gets a free estimate or they become a customer and they buy from you, you can use that email address, which already exists in your CRM system, to communicate back to Google that the value of the lead has actually changed. And so you can start enacting some of this enhancement of getting better leads, better conversions. If you do e-commerce, there's another method a lot of people don't really know about, but it's called conversion adjustments. And I just posted a video on YouTube. So if you look for conversion adjustments in my name, you'll find a video that shows you exactly how to do this as well. Now, all of this may still be a bit too complicated, so Google has introduced a third way to do this, which is conversion value rules. This one's super simple. All you do is you will say, oh, well, I know that, if I look at this example from before, customers in the United States or leads from the United States tend to convert into customers more frequently than leads that I get from India. So my business is software sales, and this is actually how it works for us. We know that if I get a lead from the United States, it is much more likely to turn into a customer. UK is sort of like in the middle, right? It's okay, but it's not as good as the United States. But what I can do now is I can actually communicate this to Google through value rules, and I can say every time I get a lead from India, I'm not going to boost the value of that so much. And so now the system can start bidding. And when I say, oh, if I get a lead from the United States, I don't know exactly if that specific one is going to turn into a customer, but I know that generically speaking, more leads from the United States will go and become customers. So I just want to boost up that value. And so now I can do this bidding thing and get you more of those high value leads. And the other cool thing with value rules is that many of you are probably concerned about performance max campaigns and smart campaigns and all of these automated campaigns from Google, where you have very few controls over how to optimize it. Well, you can use geolocation, you can use Google audiences, first-party audiences. First-party audience, by the way, all that is your email list of people who've bought from you. If you run a local operation, it could literally be people who've put an email address on a sheet of paper in your store, and then you put those on the computer and you send those email addresses to Google, and they'll map it to customers that they know and IP addresses they know. That's first-party data. Or devices, like is someone shopping on a mobile device or on a desktop device? You can use all of these things to start communicating probable value to Google. And again, it's like I get leads from different regions. If I sell air conditioning in Austin and I get a lead from Dallas, well, based on the location of that, I can tell you it's probably less likely to convert. So if I'm targeting Dallas for some reason, even though I'm based in Austin, I can decrease the value of those leads. So Google's going to be focused more on getting me leads from the right areas. So those are some ways that you can improve how you report back to Google. Now, to do all of this, one big question I have is, how do I become a superhero in PPC, right? All of these things that I've talked about, they're complicated, they take a lot of time, but these are the things that make the best advertisers because they're doing these things today. But I need some help, just like Batman has Alfred to help him out and Iron Man has Jarvis. I think PPC heroes need some help too, and so that's where automation layering comes in. And so I also call it Alfred, so came up with a little acronym there for automation layering about what that does. But automation layering is really very simple. So it's about advertisers bringing their expertise to bear on the very sophisticated machine learning that Google does. So you can use a tool like Optmyzr to dynamically change the account structure as your business goals change. Or if you're starting with automated bidding, we hear stories all the time of advertisers who see cost per click bids that exceed crazy amounts. Like the cost per click is twice the amount of money they would make on that product. Automated bidding thinks that's okay because it may be a portfolio strategy, and it thinks it's fine to buy that really expensive click here because it's going to get some really inexpensive clicks over there that's going to make up for it. But you can set up an automated rule to automatically notify you, even if you're using automated bidding, that it's doing crazy things, and then you can reel that back. And you can also teach the algorithm, right? So using conversion value rules to set better conversion adjustments, and that feeds into Google's massive machine learning. And so it's going to get you better results. So you can also think about automation layering as PPC insurance, really. This was a cool slide. We found it from IBM from back in 1979. And IBM was basically saying that computers cannot be held accountable. Therefore, they should never make management decisions. Well, here we are in 2022, and computers are making way more decisions than you're probably comfortable with. I mean, you go onto Netflix, the computer just decided what you should probably be watching, right? And that's a machine learning mechanism that kind of gets into a loop. So the more that you listen to what it recommends, the more you get sucked into that loop where it's the same shows become popular with the same people, and it's just kind of like the self-reinforcing cycle. Now, you need some insurance against that, right? You need to make sure that you still know what the machine is doing, and that's where automation layering can really help. So it can look at outcomes, it can help you maximize budget value, it can help you avoid crazy mistakes that the machines make because the machines are now running your ads. So when it comes to automation layering, you can do rules-based automation. And again, something simple, like if I see a certain keyword spending way too much money, pause it and send me an email about it, right? Automated bidding can no longer bid for it because it's doing something crazy. Maybe I need to pull it out, put it into a different campaign. Budget and KPI alerts, right? So even if you're on automation, your budget allocation across different engines, like you can automate on Facebook, you can automate on Google, but those automations don't really talk to each other. So maybe I shouldn't have been spending so much money on Facebook and I should have spent more of that Facebook budget on Google, or vice versa. Right, these are types of things that automation layering, you can build rules that help you see these opportunities and easily act on them. And then you can also start getting into value rules, which are really a huge way to drive better conversions for your business. So a lot of this stuff is covered in the book, and we'll be happy to give away a couple of copies of that book here on the session today. If you're curious about all of this on Twitter, there's a really active community called PPC Chat, so I recommend you check that out. And then if any of you are in need of a little bit of PPC help and you're running accounts up to $10,000 a month in ad spend for a single advertiser, we now have Optmyzr Lite, which is a free solution from us. We of course also still have Optmyzr Core, which is the solution that starts at just $249 a month, but that can help you optimize your accounts way more effectively. So Heather, with that, let's see if we have maybe a couple of names that you drew to give away that book. And then I'll also be happy to take any questions that folks had.
Alrighty, so the winners of the copies of the books are Eileen Begley, Louis Marcelina, John Doba, Nick LaRosa, Elaine Kerbert. And I'll type this all in the chat, but make sure you send your name and mailing address to frederick@optmyzr.com. Again, I'll put all of this into the chat. But yeah, we can get started in the Q&A. Let's see. So the first question is from Burju. So they ask, what are the hallmarks of a good PPC landing page?
Yeah, I mean, a good landing page, there's lots of studies on that, right? So first of all, it has to load really fast. People hate slow landing pages. It's easier for them to click back and go and look at a different landing page than to wait for it to load. You also want to be focused on the call to action and carrying the call to action from the ad text. So we call that preserving the scent of the query. So basically the user searched for something. They expect to see that something mentioned in the ad text. That's why a lot of people do dynamic keyword insertion. And then they expect that same thing to also be shown on the landing page. Right, and so in e-commerce, it's pretty easy to understand. If I just typed in red roses, don't take me to the homepage of a flower website where I now again have to go and look for red roses. You should have taken me to the page about red roses. So make sure there's a strong connection between those things. And then in terms of the lead capture form, you just want to make sure that it's you're not asking for too much information. And so oftentimes people equate this to if you're in sales, you wouldn't walk outside the door of your house and walk up to a stranger and ask them for their address and their phone number and their email address, right? It's kind of a relationship. You have to introduce you with your name, and then maybe you give them a white paper and all you ask for is the email address, and now they've read the white paper. They start getting some emails from you and they want to see more. Okay, now you can ask for a phone number. Now you can start having a conversation. So just be really careful about not asking for too much information, because then fewer people will fill out that form. Right, you just have to be willing to put in the work to build that relationship and not expect instant sales off that page.
Cool. Just waiting for a few more questions. Ben asked, yes, there was a giveaway. It was announced at the beginning of the webinar. Like I said, the winners have been announced. They're in the chat, and they'll send their name and mailing address to Fred. And John said that he loves your new book, Fred, and we're reviewing it with our entire team, just like we did with your first book.
Thank you, John. Yeah, John, shoot me an email, and if you want to do an author Q&A with your team, I'm happy to hop on that.
I have a question for you, Fred.
Sure.
With your book, what's your favorite chapter that you wrote for portion?
Oh my God, that's super specific. Like, what's my favorite chapter?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's so many things I like about it, but so I think the automation layering thing is that's really important, right? Because I wrote the first book, which was digital marketing in an AI world, and I equated what humans should do when they work together with these machines from Google into roles that we're already used to. And so it was the the PPC pilot, the PPC doctor, and the PPC teacher. And so in the case of the teacher, I said to people, well, you need to learn how to build your own machine learning systems. Like, that's the future. But then I started thinking about that. I was like, wow, these are marketers. Like, it's so hard to build machine learning. It's such a different skill set. And by the way, Google spends so much money on machine learning and they have so many engineers on it. Like, why should we compete against that? Right. And that's where the idea for automation layering came from. I was like, well, let Google do that stuff. Like, I'm not going to build a better bidding system, but I'm going to get Google's bidding system to be better if I help teach it something. Right. And so in terms of teaching it something, it's the concept I talked about today. It's like, how do I tell Google that, no, this wasn't just a lead, but this was actually a really high value lead. This turned into a customer. Now, communicating these things and then keeping structures in check, like all of that is still very tedious. And I was like, well, there's these simple tools like Optmyzr, like automated rules. If I just put these on top of like that massive Google machine learning system, I can actually improve my outcomes. And it's really simple for me to do, but it's so powerful. And you'll see different companies, right? Some companies are out there promising that they have a better bidding system than Google. And I'm like, there's no way you can be better. Like, and even if you had better algorithms, like Google handicaps you so much in terms of when you can set the bids, that even if you're the smartest person in the world with the most data, which by the way, nobody is going to beat Google at that, but if you were, like, you still can't beat Google, right? So the way to collaborate and to get more results is to be collaborative and to have that automation layer in. And so that's kind of like the favorite part of my book, because I think that's the newest and the thing that's going to carry people forward the most over the next decade.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing. Another question from Ben. How do you communicate with Google on when leads become customers?
Yeah, so we have a really good blog post on that on the Optmyzr blog. But Ben, so and I think we'll share the slides, but it's the slides on Gclid, or there's enhanced conversions for leads, which is the newer system that just requires you communicate the email address to them. Enhanced conversions for leads. Those are the two primary ways that you can communicate that to Google. And then once you've communicated that to Google, now you can switch from a target cost per acquisition bid strategy into a target return on ad spend strategy. And then that new data, that better data you're sending to Google is actually going to be used to give you more high quality leads as opposed to just more leads, which might not be qualified.
And Aaron Cumlin, what should you do in cases where you suspect something has gone wrong with machine learning for a given campaign that is causing results to go south? For example, if one of your conversion actions breaks for a few days and didn't send conversion actions.
Yeah, so Google has this feature now called the data exclusion. So it's under the conversion section. You can add a period of time when the system was broken, your conversion tracking was broken, and then Google will exclude that data, that date range, from the learning system. So that's a super useful feature right there. But I like how you're positioning it though, in terms of let's not just give up on automation, but let's just teach it where things were broken, because ultimately it's still going to be more powerful than completely going back to manual management. But yeah, so it's really good to keep an eye on things. So in this more automated world, definitely set up more alerts, automated alerts that will tell you when something's looking a little wonky. And then you can go and figure out why, and then use data exclusion to adjust for that. If you know ahead of time, there's going to be some craziness in the data, right? So Amazon is going to run Prime Day, and they always run it sort of different days of the year. It's not consistent when that happens. They can use seasonality bid adjustments to communicate to Google that there's something that's going to happen that's unusual, that's going to change the conversion rates, the amount of sales per click. And then Google will bid better during that period, and it will also ignore the data from that period for future learning.
Okay, and Sean asked, you mentioned about shifting budget depending on the time of year for demand, Easter decorations selling before Easter.
Mhm.
But does this not take longer for Google to understand your business as you keep changing your budget? I was under the impression you had to leave ads and budget for at least 3 months for Google to optimize your ads.
Yeah, so the point of that slide was actually about return on ad spend targets, not shifting the budget. So, so it's totally fine to change your return on ad spend targets. And again, it's just what's your profitability, right? So the Easter decorations, you probably want to put that on clearance and just clear it out to free up space for other things. So it's completely fine to go from a high return on ad spend target to a very low one as that date has shifted, as the seasonality has come to an end. As far as the shifting of budgets, so separate question there. I've never really heard that it takes 3 months for them to learn on budgets. One point though is like seasonality, right? So if you cut off your budget for Easter decorations now, and then you turn it back on before Easter of 2023, then yes, Google may need some time to relearn because the market has shifted and what it knew from last year may not be applicable to this year. So for that reason, there is a benefit to keeping some budget running so that the machine can keep learning what's happening. Generally, that doesn't take 3 months. So, I mean, the numbers that Google communicates generally 2 weeks as a learning period for bidding to work really well. But if you have lots of data, if you have big campaigns, then that can be much faster as well.
All right, do we have any other questions before we wrap up? Feel free to put it in the chat. If not, I just want to say thank you all for coming. And if you don't have any more questions to ask now or think of them later, you can email Fred at frederick@optmyzr.com, or you can email Main Street at support@mainstreetroi.com. So don't worry, you'll get your questions answered no matter what. And yeah, thank you so much for joining today's webinar, and thanks for Fred for this great information. And as a reminder, we'll be sending out the replay video and the PDF of the slides, so make sure to look out for that. The winners that I announced, again, they're Eileen Begley, Louis Marcelina, John Doba, Nick LaRosa, Elaine Kerbert. Make sure that you email Fred with your mailing address and your name to get your free copy of your book. And we look forward to seeing everyone again for our next marketing webinar. Thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.